So today we're going to be doing something that I've been promising you guys for the last couple of weeks, a breakdown and ranking of every single season of American Horror Story. So before I get started on this, I just want to say, while there is a ranking, I have to give them a number. I'm a big fan of this series, and obviously this was just very hard to choose, so it's totally subjective. I want to hear everyone's thoughts and opinions in the comment section below, as well as all of y'all's rankings. Hope everyone enjoys the video. Let's get after it. Hey everybody, before we get started on this, I decided to try my hand at a little bit of merchandise for the channel, so you can check it out in the description section below. Let's get into it. Hey YouTubers, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell over by the subscriber button to notify you every single time I upload. Starting off with the number 9 slot, Season 6, My Roanoke Nightmare. Now before I go into why this came in dead last, I have to make it very clear that I did love the very first half of the season, and I also give it points for the major shakeup halfway through going into found footage. On the surface, it's honestly a very bold and interesting choice for a series 6 seasons in that we had already come to figure out and expect certain things from. It showed even the most casual of fans that American Horror Story still had a lot of tricks up its sleeve and it could continue for years to come. But with that being said, I am just not a fan of found footage content. To me, the entire genre is lazy, predictable, and it doesn't serve to tell any story to the best of its ability. Focusing so many episodes within that format didn't endear me to it, and I think that it ultimately took away some of the bigger bites of the original part of the season. And even though I would argue that the dramatized documentary style that the first half of the season brought us was among the best of this entire season, the idea that this was a reenactment of things that supposedly happened did take away a lot of the impact and scares of those first couple episodes. And I always found it a little distracting going back and rewatching this season, knowing that we were focusing on TV executives trying to put their best foot forward and doing the right thing for their content, having casted older actors in order to play the younger people's self. Look, I understand that they're trying to build the world and they were setting up the last half of the season with what they were doing, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, at least conceptually, other than just to give Sarah Paulson and Cuba Gooding Jr. main starring roles, at least for those first couple of episodes. Every single time I rewatch it, it's very distracting because I believe it's really divorced from what the reality of the situation would be, and it makes the decisions that we see from the producers of this television show halfway through make less sense and thus harder to watch. But as I did mention at the beginning of this video, it is hard to rank these seasons, and I still very much enjoy it. I'm a fan through and through. Number 8, Season 5, Hotel. When looking into the twisted world of American Horror Story, it is really hard to pick one season over another. I feel like one of the reasons this season falls flat to me, as well as a bunch of AHS fans, despite Evan Peters' scene-stealing performance as James Patrick March, and the introduction of Lady Gaga as the Countess, is the noticeable absence of Jessica Lange as any character at all. And while this isn't Hotel's fault in particular, for the first 4 seasons of American Horror Story, Jessica Lange was the quintessential character between each and every single season, giving one iconic and award-worthy performance after another. Though it's clear that the entire series has inevitably moved on from her shadow, there was a couple of seasons of growing pains starting with this season. I think on top of everything, the introduction of the Hotel Cortez having the exact same rule structure as Murder House from season 1 ended up taking away a lot of the personality that this season could have inevitably brought, as well as serving as the start of a trend that would see American Horror Story elements make their way into other seasons, regardless of whether or not that was the right story choice for that particular area or that season. But even though this season makes it pretty far down the list, that isn't to say that it doesn't have some standout qualities. With the main story surrounding the 10 Commandment killer and the introduction of episode 4, Devil's Night, that focuses on Richard Ramirez, who becomes very important in later seasons. Not to mention a further exploration into the broader connection between all the seasons in American Horror Story. These things really did help build up what is ultimately one of the weaker seasons of the show, and help to make it, at the very least, rewatchable. Although I would argue that the introduction of Queenie from season 3 felt a little bit more heavy-handed than any other connection that we've seen in the entire series run, and the importance of which didn't really pay off for several more years. I guess in retrospect, going back and rewatching it, that's one of the reasons that it's special, but at the time I wasn't very happy with it. At the time it felt like it was trying to undercut the importance of season 3, which to this day I felt was a far better viewing experience. Number 7, season 4, Freakshow. I feel like I'm gonna get a whole lot of flack for this one, but when you sit down to think about it, Freakshow does feel like a bit of the black sheep of the family in the American Horror Story continuity. And that isn't even to say that the season has a whole lot of awesome elements. From Jessica Lange's breathtaking performance, the introduction of Twisty the Clown, and the absolute scene-stealing performance of Finn Wittrock, this season also represents the first interconnection between all the American Horror Story seasons, indicating that they're all taking place within the same world. To me, as a fan of the series, that represents a major plus, and probably one of the bigger reasons why this isn't lower on the list. I think a lot of people in the fandom would place this season higher than I am right now. But with that being said, after the first 3 seasons of the show, this season felt like more of the last-ditch effort in order to try to shake up the formula for American Horror Story. One that would ultimately go a little bit unheeded, as the show would slip back into its original formula just in the next season and onward. Freakshow is a strange and unnerving exploration into the darker realities of human existence, instead of a celebration into the world of the supernatural. Ironically, this is something that we would see yet again just a couple seasons later with the introduction of Cult. At the end of the day, I would describe Freakshow as a season devoid of almost any happiness. Unlike most other seasons that have a little bit of humor or joy sprinkled out throughout the atrocities, this season is almost wall-to-wall unnerving body horror and malicious actions by its main characters, with the only sense of joy coming from Jessica Lange's musical numbers. If there's one season throughout the entire show's run that I find it very hard to go back to, it's this one. And that's ultimately why it gets the number 7 spot. Number 6, season 7, Cult. Again, I think that this is a placement that isn't going to win me a whole lot of fans. On the whole, it feels like season 7 is really a love it or hate it type of story, with very little in between. But honestly, I don't even have the heart to talk about it in either of those extremes. Cult is a dark and deeply disturbing season that throws away a lot of different elements from the show in order to focus on the disturbing nature of mankind's mob mentality. And that, coupled together with biting commentary from the 2016 presidential election, to me makes this season worthy of not being near the bottom slot. But at the same time, Cult is one of, if not the most uneven season in the entire series run. From strange and almost idiotic plot twists to a semi-happy ending that suggests that everything is better now, but in the end, nothing really changes and everything is cyclical. It's just a mad and angry season that tries to have its cake and eat it too, trying to say everything while not really saying anything. This is one of those seasons that I find it very hard to go back and rewatch. However, the focus of throwing out everything that we'd come to expect from American Horror Story did, at least in my part, really help to rejuvenize my fandom, especially after the events of my Roanoke Nightmare. So ultimately right now, I feel like this season is the most fluid of anyone on this list. I'm willing to put it in the middle right now, but I feel like as time goes on and we get further away from 2016 and the knee-jerk reaction to that, the more this season's greatness will show itself, or it will seem just lazy in comparison. But for right now, it makes the number 6 slot. Number 5, season 8, Apocalypse. I feel like on the surface, the best thing about this season was the run-up to its initial release. The promise of having a crossover season comprised of 2 of the strongest series in the entire narrative, serving as a bridge for further exploration into the broader connection of the entire universe. And that's not even to mention the promise of the return of Jessica Lange as Constance Langdon, while also promoting the apocalypse, the biggest concept of anything that they had ever shown in the entire American Horror Story canon. Before this season even premiered, I feel like the entire fandom was at fever pitch levels of excitement. But looking back, as soon as the show started, I feel like a lot of fans felt like this wasn't the crossover that we were promised, but it more so acted as a sequel to Coven, the 3rd season in the television show. I mean, for one, the entire crossover narrative between that season and Murder House only encompassed 1 episode of the season, which, while arguably the best episode within the season, what ultimately played out wasn't so much a crossover between 2 of the strongest seasons, but more of a celebration of everything that American Horror Story has come to accomplish over the first 8 years that it had run on television. But I guess in hindsight, that's not particularly a bad thing, as by the time this season was wrapping up, they had already been renewed for 2 more seasons onward. And with the indication that that might not be the end of the entire series. So I feel like that's one of the reasons I appreciate American Horror Story Apocalypse as much as I do. In a season that revels in the exploration of pre-established characters, locations, and events that have already encompassed full seasons of the show in the past, for a show that had dominated airways for the better part of a decade. Love it or hate it, this season, unlike anything else that we had seen, really celebrates everything that American Horror Story has come to be. Ultimately, its hyper-focus on interconnectivity allowed for Season 9 to be somewhat of a palate cleanser that told its own individual story and was better for it. And that's why AHS Apocalypse makes it onto number 5 of this list. Number 4, Season 9, 1984. So like I said before, even though this season ended its run just yesterday, after Season 8 with Apocalypse, this one felt like more of a palate cleanser than anything else. It ultimately remained true to the entire series by implementing some of the things that we had seen time and time again. As I mentioned earlier with Hotel, the idea of people dying and coming back and being murderous ghosts, while overdone in the series, was always a fun concept, and I feel was better played in a season set at a summer camp than in a rundown hotel in Los Angeles. But ultimately, despite the familiar, this was the only season, at least in my mind, that tried to juggle the real-world horror concepts of Freakshow and Cult along with the more supernatural elements from other seasons like Apocalypse, Coven, and Hotel. Despite, at least in my opinion, the one bad episode in the 100th episode throughout the entire series within this season, most every single plot point and episode of this season really landed for me, the viewer. And I found myself thoroughly invested in Emma Roberts' main character, Brooke, while also in the end feeling a lot of empathy towards other characters in the show that I was supposed to hate. This season is worth pointing out that despite the loss at this point of Jessica Lange, Sarah Paulson, and Evan Peters, the three mainstays and biggest stars of the series since the very first season, somehow it stuck the landing and ended up being more enjoyable than a lot of seasons that came before it. It showed and even convinced me as a fan that American Horror Story, as Sarah Paulson recently said, is in itself the star of American Horror Story. It does not belong to any individual actor or creative force. You can set a season anywhere at any time period with any set of actors, and you can have a fun and interesting season for everyone to enjoy. Number 3, Season 1, Murder House. I can't be the only one who started watching from the very first week thinking that this wasn't an anthology series and that the Harmon family was going to be a mainstay throughout this show's run. And in hindsight, I feel like that entire concept stayed with me throughout the first season's run. And really, I do believe that that was the most shocking thing about the first season, thinking that the next season was going to have to take place exactly where this one left off, and that it would have to pick up the pieces despite everything that the show was telling me. Killing off characters left and right and exploring the entire history of the house was a little bit jarring, but it was interesting, it was fast-paced, and it was something that I had never really seen on television before. There was so much creative confidence in the first season that it's almost impossible to ignore, and it's incredibly fun to rewatch. Jessica Lange shines as Constance Langdon, while this was the very first season that I remember seeing Sarah Paulson and Evan Peters in anything. And after the practice, it was just further confirmation that Dylan McDermott is a masterclass actor and is charismatic enough to be far more serving in something else besides just television. And given where we are in this list and where you certainly know we're heading to, the only reason that it's not further up is because of where the other two seasons lie. Yes, Murder House was a somewhat wacky season at the time, but they hadn't discovered exactly what American Horror Story was yet. So with that, let's push forward. Number 2, Season 3, Coven. Now, when I talk about what American Horror Story ultimately became, I feel like you can't go any further than Season 3 in order to understand where its ultimate identity started to really blossom. I don't think it's any secret that the Coven Witches are Ryan Murphy's favorite creation from the American Horror Story universe, and one of the reasons he brought them back for Apocalypse, and even has suggested that they might get their own spin-off sometime in the near future, if not showing up in another season of the show. And I don't even think that's not a universally understood concept. With the introduction of the witches in Coven, I feel like we got the first foray into what American Horror Story became throughout most of its series run. This wasn't a season primarily built on the concept of horror. It focused more on horror elements while also giving us a whole lot of lighter elements and focusing more on comedy than any other season before it. It's a season more than probably any other in the entire series that understands who it is and what it wants to do. At least in my opinion, this season introduces Jessica Lange's best role in the entire series in Fiona Good, a powerful and selfish matriarch of the witch coven who would go to any means necessary in order to protect her own power. But at the same time, I feel like this season, more than any other before it, introduces us to one of, if not the best character that Sarah Paulson has ever played in the entire series. At the time, we weren't entirely sure that Jessica Lange was going to give up on this show altogether and leave it to Sarah Paulson to be the main focus, but in going back and watching it in hindsight, you realize that this was really a proving moment for her and one of the reasons why the show continued to be as strong as it always was, even after its main star left. It's truly a great season and one that I believe served as a template for everything that we had come to see going forward. Number 1, Season 2, Asylum. Honestly, as a fan of the series, I don't even really know where to begin to express why this is the best season of the entire show. There's a certain type of confidence and excitement that we see throughout that I'm not entirely sure that the series has ever been fully capable of recreating. I remember watching it during its initial run, as well as any other rewatches since then, and thinking to myself, what more can they possibly do within this entire series? And while this entire list is evidence that they figured out a way to keep the show going, I'm not entirely sure they've ever reached this height before. Focusing on aliens, serial killers, zombies, demon possession, crazy people, having musical numbers, and essentially just having so much fun with the narrative that you kind of get lost watching this season and you forget that it's longer than almost any other season that came after it. Seeing Jessica Lange shine as Sister Jude, while giving a lot more focus to Sarah Paulson as Lana Winters, and unlike the season prior, telling a much more straightforward story from one time period to another in order to fully contextualize what's going on. As I already said, I believe Coven is the season where they finally realized what they wanted American Horror Story to be, but going back and looking at it, I really wish that Asylum is what American Horror Story became. Going back and rewatching this season, it's very hard to escape just how haunting the story is and how much life every single actor gives to their character as the narrative progresses forward. And watching it either week to week, or if you're new or you were late to it in a binge-like format, is something truly crazy to behold. It's the type of narrative that keeps you pushing for more and doesn't allow you to stop until you reach the very end. And every single time I rewatch any of the seasons, this is the one that I focus on and the one that I get through the easiest. So while I can break down and talk about some of the other things that I liked about this season, I feel like the best reason I can put forward for this being number 1 is because unlike any other season that's come before or after it, it is the one that I constantly go back, rewatch, and enjoy. It has a certain type of staying power that I'm not entirely sure any other American Horror Story season has ever really reached. And as a fan of just entertainment in general, I've always contested that that is the most important thing when it comes to what you do and do not like. If you can go back and rewatch something with ease, no matter how long it is, that makes it better than anything else, at least when it comes to your opinion. And for me, that's exactly what Asylum is. So anyway, guys, that is my list for the 9 seasons ranked that we've got so far. I am very excited for season 10 of American Horror Story, and I want to hear everyone's thoughts and opinions about this in the comment section below. Tell me your top 9 and go into detail, guys. Tell me why you pick one season over another and why your top spot is, in fact, your top spot. Hope everyone is having a fantastic day. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that bell over by the subscriber button to notify you every single time I upload. It's been real.